Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2023 week 14, April 3rd to April 9th, and as you can see, we are just getting right back onto dash wiring. So what I'm mounting right there is the cable that goes into there is called DigiTX. That's the module that is going to drive all of the gauges. So that module talks back to the ECU on DigiTX, and then it tells all of the gauges in the cluster what to do, like where they should be displaying and whatnot. So right now, I'm just using zip ties to mount everything to that panel. I will go back and redo it with a different fastener of some sort. I just haven't decided if I'm going to do like rib nuts or if maybe I just thread right into the panel and put a bolt into the panel, because that is fairly thick aluminum. So I could probably just do that, but I haven't fully decided what I'm going to do there yet. Alright, so that module, it's got that CAN bus wire that I'm just kind of tying up and running right now. And it's got those three wires, the black, the red, and the white. And if you'll notice, all the gauges have black and red and white. The only difference is on the gauges, the white is gauge illumination, and on that module, white is DigiTX, transmit, receive. So yeah, so the white wire of that module has to go up into that 12-pin harness, and then there's going to be a wire coming from the ECU on the car side that goes into there. So I'm just running those wires in the bundle right now. I will power the module the same place where I'm powering the gauges, so the red wires. So the red wire just goes to the red. The black wire just goes to the ground side, and obviously I'm not going to tie into illumination because that little module doesn't have any lights on it. Yeah, and so what I'm doing here is I have run the DigiTX wire up to the connector, so I just need to put an end on it and then put it in the connector. So on the dash, one of the things that I have is a fuel gauge, and so the fuel gauge itself does not tie into the ECU, that goes direct to the gauge. So in this shot, I believe the fuel gauge is the one at the bottom right of the screen with the two yellow wires coming out. There was a yellow red and a yellow black, and so we just feed that gauge directly from the fuel sending units. And so the Holley gauge came with this nice long wire, and so I was just doing a quick run in the car to see if it was even gonna reach where my fuel cell is, and it does not. So I can't use the stock fuel gauge wiring, which, you know, goes with this build. I haven't been able to use most of the stock stuff just because it's a custom build, so I expect that I can't use most of the stuff that comes with these things. So in my book there, I've got all of the positions for the 12-pin connector on the dash side, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to start terminating the pins on the car side. So I did fill up the entire 12 pack, so I will have 12 wires on either side, and the 3 wires that I just taped are the 3 wires that are going to go to the backing plate terminal strips. So that's going to be a ground, that's going to be the gauge power, and the third is gauge illumination. So gauge illumination comes from the headlight switch, and then the power for that comes from the fuse panel. So from the fuse panel, I have a wire that runs all the way up into the headlight switch. There's actually 2 power wires that run from the fuse box into the headlight switch. But then when you pull the headlight switch out 1 click, it sends the power from the fuse box into the illumination feed, and then that's what turns the lights on. The gauge feed that I mentioned in that 3 bundle, that also comes from the fuse box. So when you go to ignition, the wiring for that is, there is a battery wire coming from the fuse box, if I recall correctly. Yeah, so that's right. The fuse box has a single wire that goes to the battery, and then out of the fuse box there is a wire that feeds the ignition switch, so it's got battery all the time. And then when you turn your key to ignition, the battery feeds the ignition wires. Those 2 ignition wires go back to the fuse box, and then there's 1 ignition wire going back to the fuse box to give it power, and then the fuse box sends power to the gauges. So the fuse box has two types of power. It's got battery power and ignition power. So battery power is always on. So stuff like your headlights are going to have battery power. Your horn will have battery power. Kind of your emergency stuff. And then your ignition is going to be stuff like, you know, your ignition coil. Your stereo is going to be on ignition or accessory. And then what else? Like your wipers are only on ignition. You can't turn your wipers on anytime. Turn signals are usually only ignition. So yeah, that's kind of the way your car works. You have a battery feed going into your ignition cylinder or your ignition switch. When you turn the key to ignition, it completes a circuit, sends a feed to your fuse box, which then distributes power to all of the ignition circuits. What I'm doing is I'm running a few more wires right now, and those wires are going to be power and ground for the LEDs that I'm going to have on the dash. So I'm going to have a shift light, I'll have a caution light, a warning light, the park brake light. Yeah, I think those are the 4 things that I'm going to have. So I just need to run a few wires up to them all. I believe I've set all of my LEDs to be ground triggered, so I just need to run a power wire up there, and then, yeah. I'm not sure what else to say about that. I'm just running the power wire for the LEDs, and that's going to come off of the gauge feed right there. See how what I was doing right there is I was just looking at the e-brake. Hey, how does the e-brake feed work? And it's just a ground wire. What happens is when you pull the e-brake, there is a little metal piece that contacts with another metal piece, which is connected into the chassis. So that completes a ground. So if you have a power feed going to one side of an LED, and you pull the e-brake, it's going to send a ground signal to the other side of the LED via a wire. So what I just grabbed right there is a yellow wire and a black wire. So that is going to be for my fuel gauge. The reason why I did a yellow wire is the wires on the fuel gauge were yellow. Black wire is ground. Yellow wire is going to be signal. Don't have to color coordinate it, as I've said a lot of times. The wires don't know what color they are. This is just for humans, really. And what I'm also grabbing there is speaker wire. I want to have a stereo in this car. I love listening to music while I drive. You know, I'm sure for the first long while, I probably won't listen to music too loudly because I'll just be so in love with the whine of the supercharger and the sound of the exhaust and everything else. But, you know, at some point in time, I will probably want to listen to music. So, since I know I'm going to have a stereo in this car, I know at some point in time I will have a sub. I will have a couple of amps. I figure it's best to just run this stuff now. I have it. I need to run some more wires anyways. Why the hell not do it? Like, there's no reason not to. So yeah, so I'm going to run that fuel gauge wire up to the dash, and I'm going to run the speaker wires where I need to run them, and the RCAs will go up towards the back of the stereo. And from here on out, this is work that you've seen me do a whole bunch, which is just running wires. reason why I'm running the speaker wires to behind the seats, like towards where the back seats would normally be, is because I'm planning on running an amp for my speakers, and I know that amp is going to be in the back seat. So I'll run the speaker wires into the doors to roughly where the speakers are going to live, and then I'll run them back towards where the amp is going to be. I'll leave them long, and I can decide where I want to final fit the amp later. But just having them run in place is, you know, a great start. crazy with the amount of wiring I have run for this car now. It's going to make wiring my next car that much easier because I'm going to plan it out a lot better. I'm going to really think about the circuits I'm going to run, where those need to go, and, you know, wire it much more in one shot. Especially now that for the most part I have all of the wiring that I need. Like when I was building this car, I didn't really have any bundles of wire. So every time I needed a different size, I kind of had to wait. And so going into the next car, I'm already going to have a whole ton of that wire. I should be able to run most of the circuits right out of the get-go. I also know things like buying, you know, the Ron Francis wiring panel that's specifically for the Ford. Maybe not necessarily what I want. I just want one that has, you know, the fuse panel and then say 15 feet of each wire. That way I can run it wherever I want in the car, however I want it. Yeah, so a lot of lessons learned. Yeah, it's going well. Alright, so now that I have those new wires all the way up to the dash, I can cut them short and then I can pin them into the harness where they need to go. So I think the wires I'm pinning now are the DigiTX and then the fuel gauge wires. I think the rest of them were already pinned. right, so believe it or not, thus far, all the wires that I've run, excluding stuff for the engine, has only been power wires. So all these circuits also need grounds. So yeah, all those wires are power. I haven't run a single ground wire. Well, no, I don't. Well, I may have run a few grounds, but I haven't terminated anything. So that's what I'm starting to do now. I found a great place right behind the dash. It's nice, it's solid, it's thick metal. So I just cleaned it up. I'm going to put this bolt in from behind. And then I'm going to start terminating some grounds here. And this is a great place for it. It's easily accessible. It's right behind the dash. If I pull the dash out, I can see it. Yeah, I think it's just the perfect location for grounds. So far, what up here needs a ground? Okay, so my heater control, the classic auto air brain module has ground. Radio is going to have a ground. I have that. I'm going to have a ground going up to the gauges. So on that backing plate with the terminal strips, the black line there, that's a ground. I have a ground going up to my switch panel, which I'm kind of sad now. I ran that ground all the way to the back here. Not the end of the world. I would have pulled it out, but it's taped tight with all those wires. I just kind of would have liked to have it closer to the switch panel, but you know, I need to run a ground in the back anyways, so that's fine. And yeah, so that's really all that needs grounds up here. So all of the wires for the headlight switch you see there, those are all power. Those get fed out to the front. I will have grounds for the lights near the lights. So at the front of the car, I'll have a ground near the front of the car for the headlights and the clearance lights and all of that. And same thing in the back for the brake lights and the turn lights and the tail lights. I will have grounds in the back for all of that. So yeah, there's only, what, I think I ended up with like 5 or 6 ground wires up there. I need a ground for the wipers, my heater control, radio, and the gauges. Yeah, it's crazy how all of those wires are power wires, and then there's just like a few grounds behind there. Now, mind you, if I was running a ground for each and every individual gauge, that would be a little bit busier. But since I have the terminal strip on the plate under the dash, it makes that a little bit nicer. Yeah, just like that, I have a couple of grounds. It was very simple to do. Alright, now that we've gotten a fair amount of that wiring done, let's clean up. If you ever hear about me wiring a car again, probably get some stocks in whatever zip tie company sells me zip ties, because I go through a ton of them. I think I bought a bag of 1,000. I'm already halfway through it, something like that. so we're gonna start working on, well, I mean, wiring's fun, but we're gonna start working on something new and shiny. We're gonna start working on the intake piping. So in one of the last videos, you saw me take all of the Pro Charger piping, and it just doesn't work for shit. So I bought some new couplers, I bought some new piping, and I'm going to make my own intake. It's the only option I have. So there's the silicone coupler. I believe that's a 4 1/4 reducer down to 3. So the reason why I've chosen 3" is because 3" is what the outlet of the Pro Charger is. It's what the inlet and the outlet of the intercooler are, and I don't know if there would be any benefit to having a larger pipe when, you know, the outlet is only 3". Yeah, normally I do a ton of research on stuff like this, but I didn't in this case. I just figured the outlet for the Pro Charger's 3", the inlet and the outlet on the intercooler's 3", so running a 3" pipe is probably sufficient. Although looking at this, maybe I want to run a smaller throttle body. I know that big throttle bodies can suffer drivability issues, but we'll see how this goes. It's a 102mm throttle body. The reason why I picked out that one is because the original Pro Charger that I was going had a bigger outlet on it, and then when I talked with the shop that I bought the Pro Charger from, they said that the Pro Charger I wanted wouldn't fit with the Renegade bracket, or with the bracket that I got. So I went with a slightly smaller Pro Charger, but it has a smaller outlet. So since I'd already bought all the Holley stuff before I bought the Pro Charger, I already had it, so we'll try running it with this and we'll see how it goes. Alright, so what we did is, after attaching that coupler, I took the 3" 90 bend, and I got a rough ballpark of where I wanted it cut down to fit into the intake tubing, and so cut it with the cutoff wheel. I'm just deburring it, and yeah, a ton of aluminum comes out of there. So it's really important that before I fire up this engine, I clean everything out really well. I don't want any of that shit going into the engine. Yeah, so I mean, this is pretty tight quarters. I got to put the pipe in there before I kind of put it onto the intake, and there's going to be a bunch of adjustments to make this a little bit better. Well, make it a lot better, let's be honest. But it's always better to cut short the first time and cut a second time to where you actually need it, instead of cutting it way short and then realize you need to go buy another piece. And since all my parts are coming out of the US and usually take a week to get here, I don't want to. I'd rather spend 10 minutes making a second cut than 2 weeks waiting on a part. That's already much nicer. It can actually fit in there without hitting the shock tower. And so that's just a little 3" coupler, and I got another 90, so I'm going to just throw that in there for a loose fit. So one of my original plans was to kind of have that piping come through the tube front end pipe. My plan is to eventually put like a piece of sheet metal to fill in the gap, because when I'm driving down the road, this is going to be a street car. I don't want all that rock and road and dirt and debris flying up into the engine bay. So my plan is to put a cover in there, and originally I wanted this piping to kind of go like 90 to that, but I didn't want to have like a 90 into it and then a 90 out. I figured that would be kind of harsh, so I'm just gonna go pretty much straight off the 90 from the intake, like as straight as I can, and then I'll make that panel work around the piping. I want as little restriction in my intake pipe as I can. So you can see off of that 90, I get pretty close with one straight piece of pipe, and then all I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to pie cut out like a little piece for coupling those two. Cutting off the stock, I don't even know what the hell that's called. It's a, I don't know. That's where the hose clamp would bite onto. I'm cutting that off because I'm going to weld those two tubes together. So I just want a nice flat surface to flat surface. So I'm going to cut it off on both ends, and then I can just make the tubes up and weld them together. Bead roll. The stock bead roll. That's what I'm going to call it. So I'll deburr the inside, and then I'll take both pieces over to the belt sander, and I will just sand the outsides to give it a nice clean surface to weld to. So I was just checking to see if when I made the cuts, I made them fairly square, and they were a little wonky, so just using the belt sander just to clean them up a little bit. And so now we can get the welder out, and we can just tack those tubes together. Now the reason why I'm running a little bit of tape is so that I can take my sandpaper and scuff the metal without, scuffing too much of the tube, although I really don't care about scuffing the tube too much because I know I'm going to paint them. I don't think I'm going to leave them polished. I'll probably paint them black. Haven't fully decided, so, but I mean, I've scratched the shit out of them already, so, what's a little bit more scratch from the sandpaper, didn't really matter, but whatever, I did it. And so now that it's cleaned up, I can get some tacks on there. So here I'm just checking the thickness of the metal, and we are at 80 thou, so I'm going to set the machine to 100 amps, and that should be good to weld this. Keep in mind I'm a terrible fabricator or terrible welder, so don't take advice from me on welding. Go find one of the many awesome channels out there on welding and learn from them. My stuff will hold, but it's very redneck. Yeah, so I wouldn't take welding advice from me. Yeah, I actually started out welding this, and the rod that I was using was 4043, and it wasn't great. I did not get a good weld out of it. When I swapped over to 5356, I got a much better weld. So yeah, that's why I say don't take advice from me, because I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, I ran into an issue where the welds were cracking. I would put some pressure onto the pipe with the clamp, and it was enough to break the tacks that I had made. It was very frustrating, and I decided after like the 4th or 5th or 6th time, because I don't learn of the tack breaking, I was like, shit, I'll try the 5356 rod. Maybe that'll hold better. So while I'm waiting for those tacks to cool down a little bit, I figured I should get the fender on and make sure that things are gonna clear the way I need them to clear. And as you can see, the bottom of that tube is very close to the bottom of the fender, so that's not really gonna work out all that well. Yeah, so I just loosened off the fender support tab just to see about moving that pipe and getting it to a better angle. So I guess it actually does kind of fit with the fender, but it is pretty tight. Are cooled down a little bit. Throw the pipe on there and get a real first look, and you can see how far off that's lining up now with everything, you know, welded together instead of just, you know, silicone coupler. So I need to pull a couple inches off of that 90 coming out of the intercooler. yeah, with that fit up, you can see it's pretty perfect. I was kind of lucked out there. Very happy with how that turned out. So I'm just marking on that tube. I can kind of cut that down a little bit more. So again, just cutting off the factory bead roll because I don't need it. I'm going to weld on a Monkey Fab garage end, which is a little bit nicer than those factory bead rolls, and you know, you can weld them onto any pipe anywhere. So I just want consistency. If I didn't have to cut down pipe at all, I want to use the factory bead rolls, but since I wasn't going to be able to use the factory stuff everywhere, I won't use it anywhere. I just want consistency in my fabrication. So it's the same thing with the 90 there. I could have technically left the stock bead roll on there and it would have held just fine, but since I'm not using the stock one anywhere, I don't want to use it there either. And yeah, so now we're just going to clean up those tubes, make sure it's kind of all straight again. So yeah, so as you can see, I got a gap in the pipe that I need to fill. I have that little extra piece that I cut off. So the plan is I will have it go straight off of one of those pipes, and then it'll be angled towards the other pipe. So I don't need to cut two angles. I just need to cut a single angle, which for me will be a little bit easier because I'm terrible at fabrication. And to make sure I get a straight cut through the whole pipe, I bring out the chop saw. So it'll hold it in there. I can set the angle to kind of where I made that mark with my Sharpie, and then I can cut straight through the entire thing. That's not really an aluminum blade on that chop saw, but I used it anyways. Don't do what I do. Use proper blades and proper tools. So, because I just cut that, the piece is a little bit hot, but I'm gonna, quickly deburr it, clean it up. Again, clean it up on the belt sander, and deburr the inside again because the belt sander is pretty rough on it. And first test fit, and the angle is dead on perfect. No complaints with that. That's going to work exactly what I need, because I do still need to weld a couple of ends on there. And yeah, I lost like an hour of footage. I left that little bit of corruption in there, but I lost an hour or an hour and a half of footage while I finished up the passenger side. I think the new memory card that I bought for my GoPro is bad because I had some corrupted video in some of my other some of my other videos as well, but this one was much longer, which sucks. So it's either the new memory card or it's the GoPro itself that's going. But yeah, so the passenger side is complete at this point, I believe, and I'm moving on to the driver's side. So I've got the 2 silicone couplers on the ProCharger outlet, and I've got it going to the intercooler inlet. And I need to get that race valve that you saw in there. That's an enclosed race valve. I need to get that mounted between the ProCharger outlet and the intercooler somehow. And the reason why I'm putting it there is I read a lot of forums, and you know, a lot of folks said if you can put the surge valve or after the air is heated but before it's been cooled, it's just a little bit more efficient. You know, cooling the air after it's been compressed takes effort, right? Like the air-to-air intercooler is going to heat up, the air flowing over it is going to heat up, which is going to heat up the condenser and the radiator a little bit. So if I can expel hot air into the atmosphere instead of air that's already been cooled, it'll just make the whole system, you know, hopefully a little bit more efficient. Okay, so what I was waiting for is I was waiting for welds to cool on this side. But you can see on that little pie cut there, I now have that big ring on the end. So that came from Monkey Fab Garage, and that's just for the hose clamp to bite onto. I also have that on the pipe itself. And so, yeah, so I'm just cleaning up and changing the angle on this piece a little bit using the belt sander. And just getting it to exactly what I want. And because it's on an angle, the pipe itself is a little bit bigger than the receiving, which is fine. I can weld it and then with a hammer kind of form it down and make it work. It comes out beautiful in the end, trust me. So I'm just marking 1, 2, and 3. That tells me where, when I go back to the bench, the angle that I need to have that in relation to each other. So yeah, now I can weld that piece to the 90 coming off of the intercooler. I know in a lot of my recent videos when I'm doing metal fab, I don't talk about the process because I talked about it so much. But I figured, what the hell, I was damn excited when I did this intercooler piping, or when I did this intake piping. So I want to talk about it. I want to talk about the process. I want to talk about the things I did. Yeah, so now that I have that tacked, I'm just going to fully weld out the piping. So this right here is where I got to the gap, and it's a little bit bigger. So I just took a hammer down and kind of bent it down to meet the other pipe. It's not going to interfere or hurt with anything. It just makes it so that I have a much tighter gap for welding. Because as I said, I'm not a great welder, so welding big gaps is not my forte. And I did mess up. So I'm just going over to the bench and grinding some of the welds down, and I'm going to redo them because I kind of burnt through and made a big hole and had to fill it, and so that just left a big mound of weld, which looked ugly. So yeah, just cleaning it up, and I'm going to go and redo it and go over it. I have to do that a couple of times. So that in my hand is one of the Monkey Fab end pieces. So that just slips over the tube. You weld it on the inside. You don't need to do a full bead. It's not meant to be airtight. It's only meant to grab and hold the hose clamp so that the hose clamp doesn't let go and the tube doesn't slide out. So you don't need a full bead. so while I'm waiting for that piece to cool down to actually be able to work with it, I'm going to move over to the piping for the air filter. So that's going to go straight into the Pro Charger. That's a big old 4-inch pipe right there. And I'm just cutting that down because I'm going to come silicone coupler out of the Pro Charger right into that pipe, and then that pipe is going to sit in the fender, and the air filter is going to attach to the to that pipe. The reason why I want the air filter in the fender is there's going to be a lot of hot air in the engine bay, so I want to get the Pro Charger as cool air as I possibly can, because it's already going to heat up the air a fair amount. That's what it does when it compresses. I've seen a lot of folks just have the air filter right on the Pro Charger inlet in the engine bay, and to me that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because that's just like a warm air intake or a hot air intake, because it's, you know, typically sitting right above their headers. So all it's going to do is intake hot air and then supercharge it and then make it even hotter than it already was. So I want the air filter in the fender, getting as cool of air as I possibly can. And it was at this point in time I realized that the inlet size on the Pro Charger is not 4 inches, it's like 3.75, I think. So essentially it's not going to go over onto that pipe. I do have a solution for this. I'm not going to talk about it right now because that solution does come in a later video. But at this point in time, I'm just like, fuck, what do? I don't know what to do. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to move on to something else that I can do. Yeah, so that weld has cooled down a bit. So here's the first look at the completed intake on the passenger side. I'm so proud and so happy of that thing. Like, it just, I had an idea what I was gonna do and I did it. It came together. This is probably one of the projects where I didn't spend hours and hours and hours planning how I was gonna do it, trying to make it perfect. I just did it and it worked. Yeah, so with that side done, I am going to do a little bit of cleanup here. So the reason why I am cleaning up and not continuing on the driver's side is in some of the lost footage, I am trying to figure out what to do on that side at this point in time. You saw the 290 silicone couplers, so I can have a straight shot go through there, but I also need to get the race valve installed in that area somewhere. And the race valve parts are steel and all of this piping is aluminum, so I can't weld steel to aluminum, so I need to do something in that area, and at this point in time I don't know what I'm gonna do. So I do need to figure that out, which is why I'm just like, hey, I'm just gonna clean up and I'm gonna go do something that I can do while I think about that kind of in the background. So I do think I have a solution for that problem, but since I haven't even implemented it at the time of recording, I'm not going to talk about it in case it goes completely sideways and I got to change. Alright, so what do you do when your intake piping goes sideways? You do more wiring, because that's what we love doing on this car. So what I just pulled out there is my wiper module, my wiper motor, the wiper module, because those go, attached to the steering wheel. So when I took this car apart, I don't know what I did. I don't know why I did it, but I cannot find the stock wiper module that came with this car, so I actually bought that one off of eBay. I would love to find the one that came off the car, and hopefully I do one day, but I've looked for it a few times, so I have a feeling I just chucked it, thinking, oh, well, I'll just, I'll replace it with something else, stupidly thought, oh, well, I'll just buy a new wiper module, which, it's a car from 85. You can't just do that. But luckily I found one. I haven't actually tested to see if it works. I'm just hoping that it does. But we're going to wire it in like it does. Because I'm an idiot. Oh, well. So, yeah, so I got the wiring diagram on the computer there. I just want to make sure that, things are working as I expect it to. I've got, the washer pump is one of the wires. I've got, a few other wires that I just want to make sure that they're doing what I think they're doing. And some of the wires, I don't even know what they're doing. I'm sure one's the park wire, one's the intermittent, and one's, the continuous, but I didn't read the diagram that much to understand. All I know is that the signals go into that box goes out to the wiper motor, and, magic happens. Alright, so what I'm going to do is something that's pretty typical. I'm going to cut off the power ground and the wires going out to the wiper motor, and I'm going to replace it with a Deutsch connector. Part of the reason is this module, when I bought it, they had one of those plastic clips that goes onto the power wire, so they were tapping power for something, and it damaged the wire. So, screw it, get rid of it, and let's just replace that connector with something else. So yeah, I got a power wire going in there. I feel like I have a ground wire going in there because the module's going to need a ground to work. I've got a wiper output wire, and I have a washer pump output wire that I need. So yeah, I'm going to cut those wires, strip them, and I'm going to put Deutsch connectors, Deutsch pins and a Deutsch connector on there. because of how short these wires were, crimping this and everything was very finicky. We got there in the end, but you know, I can't help but think what I really should have done is, as much as I hate to say this, I should have just placed a few longer wires on there. And if I have any issues with that, that's probably what I'll do. I'll probably just chop that Deutsch connector off, wire some, or crimp, some splice some longer wires on, and then put the Deutsch connector on. But my assumption is I'm not going to have any issues. It's going to work perfectly the first time. Yeah, those Deutsch connectors aren't really designed to have, you know, double wires pushed into them. So I had a bit of a tough time getting them pushed in. I had to grab a pair of pliers to help me out. So yeah, I don't think I'll be doing 2 wires into a single Deutsch connector again. It's just not good. So what I'm running right there is a power wire that's going to go down to the wiper. I need power out to the wiper. I need the washer pump, and then I need signal wire. So I think there's 4 wires going out to the leaving the. Yeah, there's either 4 or 5 wires leaving that connector that need to go somewhere. So yeah, I think it's a ground, a power, washer pump, and then maybe 2 wires to the washer motor or wiper motor. So I'm just grabbing and I'm going to start running those wires. watching this back, I'm sitting here thinking, I've only got 4 wires there. That's odd, because I have 4 wires going to the washer pump, or to the wiper motor, and I'm missing the washer pump wire. So yeah, so I started running those, and I realized I forgot to wire in the washer pump. So you just saw me grab a green wire, which is going to be for, you guessed it, the washer fluid pump. Yeah, after watching the video before I saw myself go and grab that extra wire, I actually went out to the car and went, holy shit, did I mess that up? And fortunately I did not. Well, I did, but caught it early. So now what I can do is I can cut all those ends off, I can strip them, I can crimp them all on, and we can get ready to go. So at this exact moment in time, I am making a critical fuck up. And when I was doing this, I wasn't thinking too much about it. And I just realized what the fuck I did. So I just plugged the power wire in. But that's the power wire going out to the wiper motor itself. I don't have power coming into this module. This module needs power, and there is a purple wiper feed wire sitting on the ignition column right now. So what I just had to do is all those wires that I terminated, well, I need to wire the purple power feed wire in with the red wire. So all those terminations that I just did, some of the wires are going to be too long, so it's quicker and easier to just cut them off and redo them all. But I need to make sure that the red power wire is tapped in with the power wire coming from the car. I can't believe I just did that. But I caught it early enough that I didn't, get everything in the car and, realize it out there. Fortunately, I realized it as soon as I push the first pin in. Yeah, the power has to split to the wiper motor itself and this box. Yeah, so now that I figured that out, I can put the steering wheel back in the car, and I can go back in the car and re-crimp those wires, but crimp the 2 power wires together as they're supposed to be. Yeah, so it kind of works out really nicely that there's that brace there, because there was a screw on the brace that I just pulled out, and just temporarily got that box up onto the brace. For permanent mounting, I'll actually drill it out and probably retap a hole and put a bolt to hold it up. But for right now, that all kind of worked out perfectly. So we're just going to go ahead and crimp the other side of this connector and run those wires over to the driver's side through panel connector. Yeah, so that purple wire that's just hanging there, that's the wire I was talking about earlier. That is the wiper power feed coming from the fuse box. So that has to connect and splice with the red power wire, which I almost fucked up again there. I almost just crimped the single wire on, which would have been not desirable. So yeah, I'm going to crimp the purple and the red together under one single connector, and crimp the rest of them. Looks like I already crimped the rest of them, so I just need to crimp that one together. Okay, with that connection done, the wiper wiring under the dash is done. I don't remember why I'm grabbing a ground wire, but I'm sure there's a reason, and we'll figure that out in a second here. Oh, it's because I need a ground wire for the horn and the line lock. That's why. now that those wires have been run over to that connector, there's no reason why we can't undo the connector, pull it back, and terminate all those wires into the connector right now. No point in waiting. I got all the tools out. So I think that's what I'm about to do. I hope that's what I'm about to do. So yeah, so that right there is my wiring diagram. So I'm just kind of picking which connectors I want to use to run these wires. So at this point in time, I figured it would be a good idea to put the dash back in for some reason. I don't remember why, but I'm sure I had a reason. yeah, I still don't know why I put the dash back in. I guess make sure it still fits. Don't know, because you saw me push the wires through, and now I'm going to pull it right back out. So really, what was the point of putting it back in? Your guess is as good as mine at this point. But more wiring that we can do is I need to run power and ground to the front of the car, and that's done with those rad lock connectors from Maven Performance. So I figure, you know, no time like the present, might as well start crimping the wire and running those wires. So I did get a very nice crimp on this, and I just give it a tug test just to make sure it doesn't pop out, and it's solid. So let's go. Let's put this in the car. Let's get it run roughly to length and then cut it. So here we're just connecting it, and we're going to loosely run it to the back and get an approximate amount, and then cut it, and then we'll redo the same on the positive side. have the wires in the car, I can grab some zip ties and I can start kind of just tying them together and getting them run very loosely in place. In theory, that should be behind carpet, I think. I don't remember how far up the carpet goes, but it shouldn't be too big a deal where it is. Well, folks, that is where we're going to leave this video off. As always, if you've stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the next one.